The late sun bathed the rolling hills of southern Oregon in a soft amber glow, casting long shadows over the land that swayed with golden wheat and tall grass. It was the kind of place people passed without noticing, a patch of earth that looked like any other, quiet, distant, harmless, and that was exactly how Lena Harrow liked it. Her ranch stretched for miles, tucked between the ridges of low mountains and ancient pines, with a single gravel road curling in like a lazy serpent from the main highway. Cattle moved slow and steady, chickens darted between coop and field, and the sound of wind chimes danced through the air like whispers from another life. The house itself was modest, made of cedar and stone, worn by time but cared for with a kind of intimate precision. She built it with her own hands, not long after she left everything behind. It was more than a home. It was a barrier between who she had been and who she wanted to become. Lena had once gone by another name, though that name was burned into records now sealed behind a dozen security clearances. She had been the commander of Echo Unit, a ghost division of Delta Force so deep in the shadows that even the whispers about them were rare. She'd seen the worst of the world, not from a distance, but face to face, blood on hands, eyes open kind of way. That part of her was quiet now, coiled deep in the muscles of her back and the instinct behind her breath. She didn't talk about it. She didn't have to. Anyone who'd seen her move, precise, calm, still as a winter lake, knew there was something else behind the calluses and quiet smile. But this land gave her peace. The dirt under her fingernails was honest. The sky didn't lie. And most days that was enough. Until the trucks came. It started like any other morning. Lena was out by the barn, mending a broken fence line with a coil of wire slung over her shoulder and a pair of worn leather gloves tight on her hands. The sky was clean and the wind mild, carrying the scent of dry hay and diesel. She heard the engines before she saw them, low rumbles like distant thunder that didn't belong in this quiet part of the world. She paused, brushing her hair back with the crook of her wrist, and waited. 3 black SUVs rolled up the gravel road in a slow, deliberate line. The kind of vehicles that weren't local, too shiny, too dark. The kind that carried weight that didn't announce itself until it was too close to turn back. Lena stood still as they stopped in front of her, arms loose, chest quiet, eyes narrowing just a fraction. The doors opened in unison and a handful of men stepped out. Young, armed, confident in that careless, twitchy way that came from being feared more than skilled. They wore designer sunglasses and tactical boots, mismatched tattoos crawling up their necks like vines choking a wall. The man who stepped forward last had the kind of presence that said he expected things to go his way. His suit was slim cut, his hair slicked back, and the pistol tucked into his waistband wasn't for show. He smiled, a little too easily. "You the owner?" he asked, looking her up and down with a thin veil of mock respect. "I am," Lena said, voice flat. "What brings you out here?" He gestured with an open palm. "Nice place, quiet, unprotected. You ever think about selling?" Lena didn't move. Not once. That earned a chuckle from the group behind him. The man took a step forward, close enough to smell the sweat on his collar. "That's a shame. See, we're expanding. Looking for distribution routes, storage, and this land? It's perfect." Lena tilted her head just slightly. "Then you're lost. This isn't for you." There was a pause, a long one, the kind that stretches between breath and violence. "You don't seem to understand," he said, his smile sharpening. "This isn't a request." Lena held his gaze. She didn't blink. Then, without warning, she turned and walked back toward the barn. No rush, no fear, just distance. The men exchanged confused glances. The lead one scoffed and followed, waving two of his guys to flank her. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know they'd just stepped into the home of the most decorated Special Forces operator in modern military history. She didn't raise her voice, didn't reach for a weapon. She just moved, fast. By the time the first one crossed the barn threshold, she had already grabbed the hay hook from the beam beside the door and driven it into the soft spot below his ribs. He folded without a sound. The second came next, weapon half raised, too slow. Lena spun low, grabbed his ankle, and yanked it hard, sending him crashing against the wooden post. She disarmed him mid-fall, the gun disappearing into her palm like it belonged there. She didn't fire. Not yet. The others weren't dumb. They heard the noise, saw the drop, and rushed in. But Lena wasn't in the barn anymore. She was already behind them, moving through the shadows like something primal, something born in the dust and silence. One by one, she dismantled them, not with bullets but with the force of motion, muscle, and memory. It was art. Brutal, exact, fluid. When it was over, the last man standing was the one who'd smiled first. Now he stared at her with wide eyes, blood dripping from his nose, disbelief painted across his face. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered, backing away. Lena stepped over one of the groaning bodies and crouched to pick up a fallen cigarette from the dirt. She rolled it between her fingers, looked him in the eye. "No one you were ready for," she said, and then she hit him so hard he stopped remembering. She dragged the survivors to the edge of her property, tied them with zip cords she kept in a box labeled Livestock Repair, and left them with a note written in sharp red ink. "Next time, send someone who knows how to knock." The sheriff came later, a good man named Ross who knew better than to ask where her training came from. He took one look at the scene and sighed. "Cartel?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Want me to take a report?" "No," she said. "They'll be back." And when they came back, she would be ready. Not as the farmer they thought she was, but as the storm they didn't see coming. The men she left at the edge of the property were gone by dawn. Sheriff Ross had driven out early, spotted the empty zip ties fluttering in the wind, and didn't bother knocking on Lena's door. He knew better. She wasn't the kind of woman you checked in on after something like that. If she wanted help, she'd ask, but she never did. That morning, like every other, she fed her chickens, checked her irrigation lines, and repaired a cracked hinge on the south gate with the same quiet focus she'd use cleaning a rifle. Nothing in her rhythm changed, but deep inside, something old had stirred. It hadn't fully woken yet, but it had rolled over in its sleep, and it would not go back to rest easily. She knew they'd return. The cartel didn't take insults lightly, especially not ones that came with broken bones and unconscious bodies. She hadn't killed anyone, not yet, but that decision had been deliberate. The message she sent was loud, but not final. Now she regretted holding back. These men wouldn't retreat quietly. They'd feel humiliated, exposed, and men like that came back not for territory but for pride. It wasn't about the ranch anymore. It was about revenge. That made them more dangerous and more predictable. In a quiet corner of her basement, behind a wall that looked like the back of a pantry, was a steel hatch. Inside, the air was dry, the light dim. The room hadn't been touched in years. It smelled of dust and old memories. On the far side, draped in olive canvas and bolted to the floor, was a crate marked only with a serial code and the fading insignia of a unit that technically didn't exist. She unlatched it slowly. Her fingers knew every groove, every lock. Inside were her tools, firearms custom forged for operations across continents, blades weighted to her grip, equipment that had never been meant for civilian use. She stared at it all for a long time, then reached for the matte black carbine near the bottom. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just took a deep breath and began cleaning it with mechanical patience, as if slipping into an old skin. That same day, 200 miles south, in a gated hacienda on the outskirts of a town too scared to name the men who ran it, a man named Mateo Cruz smashed a glass of bourbon against the wall. His hand was wrapped in gauze, soaked through with dried blood. His nose was crooked now, the cartilage shattered by a single blow he hadn't seen coming. His pride was shattered worse. The men who'd come back from Oregon, bruised, humiliated, broken, were now missing fingers, teeth, or dignity, and none of them had answers that satisfied him. Just one name, spoken with disbelief and shame: Lena Harrow. Cruz was no fool. He'd risen through the ranks of the Aguilar Syndicate not by force alone, but by knowing when to listen. And now he listened hard. His contacts in the military world, the ones he kept close for black market deals and smuggling operations, ran her name quietly through the darker corners of the intelligence community. What came back wasn't a file. It was a whisper, a warning. A photo so redacted it showed only a pair of eyes under night vision goggles and a string of words typed in classified code. But the implications were clear. This wasn't just some tough farmer protecting her land. This was someone who'd hunted warlords for breakfast and vanished insurgents before sunset. Someone who trained assassins to be ghosts and who never left loose ends. And now she was hiding in plain sight, living among livestock and dirt roads. Still, Cruz was not one to back down. He believed in punishment, in fear, in spectacle. If he didn't hit back hard, his own men would start asking questions. Loyalty in his world was held together by fire and threat. So he made a call. Not to the street soldiers, not to the flash and swagger types he usually sent. This time, he reached out to someone different. A woman known only as Reyna, a former guerrilla-turned-mercenary, fluent in ambush and psychological warfare, cold, exact, and far less emotional than her boss. She didn't smile when he offered the job. She just asked for the layout, the target's known habits, and a down payment wired to a shadow account. Back in Oregon, Lena could feel the shift in the air. It was the kind of instinct you can't teach. The crows flew lower. The wind felt wrong. Tracks appeared in places where no trucks had passed. She started waking up earlier, walking the property perimeter with a rifle slung across her back and her old dog, Rocco, trotting beside her, ears twitching at every sound. She reinforced the outbuildings, buried motion sensors at strategic entry points, upgraded the locks, reset the cameras, and pulled out a laptop wrapped in foil that hadn't seen the light in years. Within an hour, she'd tapped into old satellite channels and was reading encrypted signals bouncing off towers 4 states away. She wasn't waiting for them to arrive. She was studying their patterns before they left home. But Reyna didn't come with trucks and shouting. She came like a storm that builds quietly on the horizon. First, Lena's power flickered for 3 nights in a row, even though the grid was stable. Then, her livestock feed was contaminated. Nothing deadly, but enough to make the animals restless and sick. Then came the drone, small, fast, nearly invisible, skimming the treetops at night. Rocco barked at shadows, and Lena knew it wasn't just paranoia. Someone was watching. Not amateurs, professionals. And yet she didn't leave. She stayed, not out of pride, not out of recklessness, but because she understood something Reyna didn't. This land was hers, not in paperwork or bank statements, but in memory and blood. Every inch of it had been rebuilt by her hands. It wasn't just a farm, it was the only place she'd ever let herself soften, and now they wanted to stain it with fear. That was not something she would allow. The next evening, just as dusk began folding itself over the valley like a worn blanket, Lena climbed the ridge above the western fence line and waited. The wind carried scents of pine and engine oil. She lay flat, a scope pressed to her eye, heartbeat low and even. It didn't take long. A team of 4 emerged from the trees, silent, dressed in camouflage that matched the foliage. Reyna wasn't among them. These were scouts, testing her boundaries, feeling for weak spots. One of them knelt, placing a small black box against a fence post, a signal repeater meant to scramble surveillance. Smart, tactical. Lena respected the move, but she didn't hesitate. A single crack echoed, low and controlled. The scout dropped, the others froze. Then chaos. 2 bolted toward the woods, but she'd already calculated the angles. They didn't make it. The last one raised his hands, voice trembling in Spanish she hadn't heard in years. She didn't shoot him, not yet. Instead, she stepped out of the shadow of the pines, rifle still raised. "You tell Reyna," she said in his language. "Next time, she better come herself." She let him run, not because she was soft, but because sometimes fear moves faster than bullets. Let them know what she was, let them wonder what else she was willing to do. That night, she sat on the porch with Rocco, the sky alive with stars. She held a mug of coffee in both hands, sipping it slowly, gaze fixed on the dark line of trees in the distance. They would come again. She knew it. They'd come heavier, louder, more desperate. But this time she wouldn't be waiting. She would be hunting. They didn't wait long. The cartel's next move came with fire. 3 nights after the failed scout mission, when the air was thick with early summer heat, and the moon hung low and bloated like an old lantern, Lena woke to the sound of her barn crackling with flame. It wasn't the kind of accidental fire that starts from dry hay or faulty wiring. It was deliberate, timed, surgical. Accelerants had been poured in a pattern, one she recognized from her time dismantling insurgent outposts overseas. The blaze roared with intention. It wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to send a message. We can reach you. We can take pieces of you without even seeing your face. But whoever ordered it didn't understand Lena Harrow. Messages like that weren't warnings. They were invitations. She was out of bed before the smoke even reached the house, barefoot, breathing through a soaked towel, eyes stinging but sharp. The animals had already been spooked. She could hear them in a chorus of panic from the sheds. She didn't run toward the fire. She didn't grab a hose. Instead, she moved to the edge of the porch where she kept a lockbox disguised as a storage bench. From it, she pulled her sidearm, night vision headset, and a shortwave radio patched into an encrypted frequency only she used. The barn was already a loss, but whoever set it had to come in through the eastern side, past the second gate, where she'd recently planted claymore warnings, not to kill, but to alert. She clicked the headset on. In her right ear, a faint electronic ping let her know someone had passed too close to the sensors. 2, maybe 3. No retreat. They were still inside the perimeter. She moved like she'd never left the field. Every step was silent, every corner cleared with practiced patience. Her breathing didn't change. Her hands didn't shake. Firelight painted the side of the house in a violent orange and danced across the tall grass like something alive. Lena slipped through the brush around the western trough and crouched low, eyes scanning for movement. Then she saw it. 2 silhouettes backlit by the blaze, faces covered, rifles loose in untrained hands. Not cartel grunts. Freelancers. Mercenaries, probably Eastern European by the gait and gear. They'd been subcontracted. That meant Reyna was watching from a distance, playing her hand carefully. Cowardly, but strategic. Lena knew the type. She'd once been the ghost other ghosts feared, but Reyna was the one who worked from the dark corners of people's minds, manipulating others to do her violence. But Lena didn't believe in using others. She did her own killing. The first one didn't even see her. She crept up behind him, a knife in one hand, pulled him into the dirt before he could even yelp. The second turned, but not fast enough. Lena slammed his own rifle into his throat and drove her boot into his stomach, pinning him hard. He squirmed, his eyes wide with surprise. She leaned in, breath calm. "You're not from around here," she said quietly. The man spat blood, cursed in a language that told her all she needed. Serbian, high-level freelancer, likely ex-military. That confirmed the escalation. Reyna wasn't playing anymore. "You burn what you can't take?" Lena asked. "That how it works now?" The man didn't answer, so she gave him something to remember. Just enough pain to make him regret taking the contract, then tied him to a post where the smoke would sting but not kill. Let him sit with his choices. The fire, meanwhile, had begun to die on its own. She'd built the barn with heavy green pine, not knowing it would one day buy her extra minutes in a siege. The roof collapsed with a moan. The smoke choked the sky. But Lena didn't even blink. She simply radioed Ross, told him not to come until morning, and returned to her basement with new footage to analyze. That night, while the scent of scorched timber still lingered in the walls, Lena opened a file she'd kept buried under a fake identity server. It was a profile, not on Reyna, but on the woman Reyna used to be. She had once been a rebel fighter in the jungles of South America, part of a brutal splinter cell that had drawn international attention for torturing UN medics and leaving their bodies staged for psychological impact. That was years ago. She'd disappeared, then reemerged in whispers, like a bad dream that never stayed gone. But Lena remembered her. They'd never crossed paths directly, but her name had floated through mission briefings like a toxin in the water, untraceable, but always present. Now their circles had finally overlapped, and Lena had no intention of waiting for the next strike. She made plans, not with words, but with action. Mapped out her land, reinforced weak points, rewired the property's solar batteries to power directional EMPs, short range, powerful enough to fry incoming surveillance drones or comms if triggered properly. She slept in 2-hour intervals, ate only what she needed, drank water by the gallon, and trained like she was back in deployment. Old injuries protested, but her body remembered. Pain wasn't the enemy. Hesitation was. Meanwhile, Reyna gathered her own team, not soldiers, hunters. Former intelligence analysts turned rogue, people who didn't wear uniforms or badges, but instead moved like rumors. They studied Lena's property from a satellite lens, tagged every movement pattern, every supply delivery, every piece of behavior that could predict a weakness. But it was like studying a storm by watching the clouds. You could measure all you wanted, but in the end, the only thing you really knew was that it was going to hit hard and you couldn't stop it. The next attempt came at dusk again. She knew it would. Attackers liked twilight. It blurred the line between light and cover, but Lena had prepared for that too. The fence line near the old irrigation ditches had been rigged with pressure-triggered flares that would reveal movement without disorienting her night vision. Sure enough, 3 distinct flashes bloomed like sudden stars. They were trying to flank. They thought she was centralized, wrong. She didn't stay inside the house. She moved through the barn ruins, rifle in hand, Rocco beside her, silent as breath. Her traps weren't designed to kill. They were designed to slow, to spook. Let the attackers make noise, give away their fear. One stepped on a tripwire, got an earful of sonic concussion. Another ran into barbed netting disguised as vine. It was a game of control, of letting them believe they were close right up until the moment they realized they weren't even on the right battlefield. She picked them off one by one, not out of malice but necessity. This wasn't about retribution anymore. It was about declaration. She wasn't prey. She wasn't even territory. She was the war they brought on themselves. By the time the last body fell into the tall grass, Reyna knew. She felt it not through reports, but in her bones. She was dealing with someone who didn't fear death, because she had lived so long inside it that peace felt unnatural. Lena wasn't trying to survive. She was baiting the end game. Later that night, sitting in the same chair she always did, coffee in hand, gun resting beside her thigh, Lena watched the sky return to stillness. Rocco had curled up beside her, finally sleeping again. Somewhere in the valley below, sirens whispered in the distance, late and pointless. No one would claim the bodies. No one would trace the weapons. She knew how Reyna worked. Disposable hands always. But soon there would be no more intermediaries. This wasn't just a border war now. This was personal. Reyna would come, and when she did, Lena would be ready. Not because she wanted vengeance, because she wanted closure. It started the way storms do, not with thunder, but with silence. A morning too still, a sky too empty. Lena stood on her porch that day, the last of the dew still clinging to the edges of the grass, watching the horizon with a gaze that didn't blink. Her coffee sat untouched on the rail, growing cold in the cup. Rocco didn't bark. He didn't move. He lay near her feet with his ears perked, muscles tight under his brindled coat. Something was coming. Not scouts, not freelancers, not the clumsy boys with shiny guns and stolen tactics. This was something else. A different pressure in the air. Like the moment before detonation. Like the breath between a question and a bullet. Reyna was here, not just her name. Not just her voice over radios or her plans moving men like pawns. She was here. Somewhere on Lena's land. She'd crossed into Oregon with a small cell of operatives so quiet they didn't trip a single sensor. No explosions, no forced entry. Just silence, and shadows, and strategy. Lena knew this wasn't about reclaiming a failed mission. It wasn't about drugs, or routes, or land. This was about proving something. Between two ghosts who'd spent years in the dirt doing the kinds of things no one spoke about at dinner tables. This was about legacy, about whose story ended. Lena didn't panic. She didn't run. She moved through her house like she was walking through memory, checking windows, blind spots, breach points. She layered her defense in movement and misdirection. Mirrors where there should be glass, decoys in the shed, pressure tiles in the foyer reversed to trigger from the opposite side. Her traps were not made for panic. They were made for chess. Psychological plays dressed as tactical ones. Even if Reyna was expecting them, they'd still bend her timeline. That was the key. Control time. Control everything. Hours passed. Maybe it was minutes. Hard to tell. Lena didn't eat, didn't speak, just moved, like water shifting to match the shape of the threat. Then it began. The first breach came through the root cellar. An ancient entry point reinforced with stone and memory. Someone tried to gas the vents, old-school knockout cocktail that might have worked on someone who hadn't spent 2 decades breathing worse in the jungles of Mogadishu. She'd prevented the air intake with filter foam. It caught the chemical stink before it even touched her lungs. The first man had never made it 3 steps. He tripped a soundless mine, non-lethal but crippling. She finished the job with a dart fired from her wrist mount, the kind designed to stop a wild boar. He collapsed before his comms chirped a warning. 1 down. She dragged his body behind the freezer, just to remind them later that he had died slow. The second came through the kitchen wall. Clever. A weak point, but not unprotected. She'd wired the entry panel to discharge a flash when the internal voltage shifted. The explosion blinded him long enough for her to embed a blade in his thigh and another near his collarbone. She didn't kill him. She wanted him to scream. He didn't disappoint. His cries echoed through the lower floor like a signal flare, and for the first time, Lena heard something new. Footsteps, measured, unrushed, upstairs. She turned toward the sound, heart rate barely flickering. The house fell into a cold hush, even with the blood on the floor. That was Reyna. She didn't come with chaos, she came with poise. It was never about how many died, but how precisely they were erased. Lena ascended the staircase like a specter, quiet, ready. At the top, light spilled through a window, illuminating dust like fog. Reyna stood at the end of the hallway, gun lowered, face bare. She was older than the photos Lena had seen, not soft, but more human. Tired, maybe. Eyes that had watched nations fall without blinking. They stared at each other for a long time. Neither moved. "You were always going to be a problem," Reyna said at last, voice calm, sharp. Lena didn't smile. "You should have come sooner." Reyna tilted her head, half admiring, half analyzing. "I thought you were myth." "You still do." Then the silence broke. The firefight was short, brutal. They were mirrors of each other, efficient, ruthless, emotionless. Every step was calculation, every twitch a test. They traded bullets and breath in the hall, tearing through drywall, splinters flying like shrapnel. Lena rolled across the floor into a side room, took a shot to the shoulder that passed clean through muscle but didn't touch bone. She gritted her teeth and returned fire, grazing Reyna's hip. Blood bloomed. Neither stopped. Reyna flanked fast, circling into the upstairs office, using the shadows. But Lena knew her own house better than Reyna could have predicted. She ducked low, crawled through the floor vent space she'd reinforced years ago as an escape hatch, and came out behind her. Reyna heard it, but too late. Lena rose from the dust, caught her with a shoulder check, and they crashed through the upstairs railing onto the main floor below. Pain hit like a drum. Both women scrambled. No words now, just movement, instinct, survival. Their weapons were gone. It was hands now, flesh and grit. Lena took a blow to the ribs, landed an elbow to Reyna's throat. Reyna countered with a knee to her gut, and they slammed against the fridge, knocking it over with a thunderous crack. It ended in the kitchen. Two warriors on their knees, bloodied, heaving. Reyna reached for a blade on her boot. Lena reached faster. She didn't stab her. She pressed the blade against Reyna's neck and leaned in close, breath hot. "This ends now," she said. "You walk away, or you die here." Reyna, to her credit, didn't flinch. She studied Lena's face. Maybe she saw something there, resolve, finality, an edge too sharp to dull. Then she dropped the blade, let her hand fall. Blood pooled between them. "You won't see me again," she whispered. "You already did." Lena let her go. Not because she believed in mercy, but because this war, the one carved into her bones and nightmares, needed to be done. She watched Reyna limp out of her house, past the smoking wreckage, past the bodies of her own ghosts. No backup, no last tricks, just retreat, maybe shame, maybe understanding. Either way, Lena didn't chase. She stood there, breathing hard, hand pressed to her shoulder, sweat and blood mingling down her arm, until the sun started to rise through the broken front windows. She didn't call Ross, didn't explain what had happened. There would be no news stories, no headlines, no footage. Just the quiet knowledge that the worst had come to her land and had been turned away not with armies but with grit, and grit alone. She buried the bodies herself, burned the rest, cleaned the blood like it was just another chore. The fire in her barn would be the only trace. Everything else vanished with the morning fog. Weeks passed, the grass grew again, the animals settled. She never replaced the weapons in the basement, never refilled the traps. She let the silence return, not because she believed the world was safe, but because for the first time she felt finished, not whole, not healed, but finished. The storm had passed, and she had not just survived it, she had outlasted it. And in the end, that was enough.